The pen was already moving when she walked in. Marcus didn't look up. The papers were clean, 32 pages, everything divided, everything settled. Then the door opened a second time, smaller footsteps. His daughter Lily stood in the doorway of his attorney's office, school backpack still on, holding a crayon drawing of their family house. She set it on top of the divorce papers without a word. Marcus's hand stopped. Why does she look at me like she already knows something I don't? Before we begin, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you're new to the channel, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Marcus Hale had rehearsed this moment for 3 weeks. He knew which chair he'd sit in. He knew he wouldn't look at Claire when she entered the room. He knew he'd keep his jacket on, his posture straight, his voice flat. This was a business decision. That was the only way to survive it: treat it like a transaction, sign where the attorney pointed, and walk out before any of it became real. He arrived 7 minutes early. The office was all dark wood and quiet. The kind of room designed to make people feel like the decision had already been made for them. Claire was already there. She was seated on the far side of the table, hands folded, and she wasn't crying. Marcus noticed that immediately. He'd prepared for tears. He hadn't prepared for this, her stillness, the way her eyes moved to the door the moment he walked in, like she'd been watching it before he arrived. Not waiting for him. Watching for something else. Something she either expected or dreaded. He sat down. The attorney began. Marcus signed 3 pages before the door opened again. No knock. No receptionist announcing anyone. Just the soft click of the handle and then small footsteps on hardwood, and then Lily, 7 years old, backpack still on her shoulders, ponytail slightly crooked, walked into the room like she had every right to be there. She stopped at the edge of the table. She looked at the papers. She looked at Marcus. Then she reached into her backpack, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and set it directly on top of the divorce documents without saying a single word. The attorney stopped mid-sentence. Claire's chair shifted. Marcus looked down. It was a crayon drawing, their house, the one on Linden Street with the big oak tree and the blue shutters. Lily had drawn it 100 times. He'd seen versions of it on the refrigerator, on his office desk, folded into his coat pockets on mornings she didn't want him to leave for work. He recognized the tree. He recognized the shutters. He recognized the 3 figures standing in front, himself, Claire, and Lily, all holding hands, the way children draw families when they still believe families stay. But there was a 4th figure. Standing at the window. Inside the house. Not part of the group on the lawn. Just watching. Marcus didn't recognize him. He looked up at Lily. "Sweetheart, how did you get past the front desk?" She ignored the question. "I'm not leaving until you don't either." The attorney cleared his throat quietly and said nothing useful. Marcus kept his voice calm. "Lily, I need you to wait outside, okay? This is grown-up stuff. I know what it is." She sat down in the empty chair at the end of the table. She folded her hands exactly the way Claire had hers folded. "I'm staying." For a moment, no one spoke. And in that moment, Marcus made the mistake of looking at Claire, the first time since he'd walked in. He expected to find her embarrassed, or quietly pleased that Lily had disrupted things. Instead, she was watching Lily with an expression he couldn't quite name. Not pride. Not amusement. Something closer to pain. She was afraid of something. He just didn't know what. Marcus looked back at the drawing. The 4th figure. Standing at the window. Drawn carefully, more carefully than the other figures, he realized. Lily had given the others simple circular heads and stick arms. But this figure had details. A shirt. A collar. And something small and dark on the left wrist. Marcus picked up the drawing. He looked closer. A watch. Small. Rectangular. Dark strap. He owned a watch exactly like that. Had worn it for 11 years. A gift from his father. He hadn't seen it in almost a year, not since he'd lost it somewhere around the house during the last bad stretch of the marriage. He was still staring at it when Claire's hand came across the table and took the drawing from him. Smooth. Quick. Like she'd been ready to do it. She folded it once. Then again. She set it face down beside her chair. "She has an active imagination," Claire said. Her voice was steady. Her hand was not. Marcus watched her fingers press flat against the folded paper, holding it down like it might open on its own. He thought about the 4th figure. He thought about the watch on its wrist. And then he thought about something that made no sense, that the figure wasn't standing outside the house, looking in. It was standing inside the house. Looking out. The attorney asked if they were ready to continue. Marcus didn't answer right away. He was still looking at Claire's hand on that folded paper, still and white-knuckled, and he was trying to remember the last time he'd seen her afraid of anything. He couldn't. "If Lily's drawing stayed with you, you're not alone," Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you're new here and you love stories about family, secrets, and the truth that refuses to stay hidden, subscribe and turn on notifications. There's so much more to this story than you think. Marcus told himself the same thing on the drive home that he'd been telling himself for 3 weeks. He was the one who got hurt. He was the one who built everything, the company, the house, the life, and watched it fall apart anyway. He was the one sitting across a table from the woman he married, signing papers that divided 12 years into columns and line items. He was the one who deserved to feel wronged. He almost believed it. Then Diane called. Claire's sister had never liked him. That was never a secret. But she'd always been polite about it, the kind of polite that sits in the corner of a room and watches without speaking. When she called and said she wanted to meet, he almost didn't go. He went. They sat at a coffee shop 2 blocks from Marcus's office. Diane didn't order anything. She folded her hands on the table the same way Claire always did, and Marcus noticed that, and it made something in his chest pull tight. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "Okay. I'm here because Claire won't say this herself, and someone should." She looked at him directly. "You didn't lose her, Marcus. You were never present enough to have her." He started to answer. She kept going. "The first year. Do you remember the first year?" She didn't wait. Claire was alone in that house 5 days out of 7. She handled the bills, the move, the contractor who tried to overcharge you, the leak in the roof that winter. She did all of it. She didn't complain because she believed in what you were building. She believed in you. Marcus said nothing. She stopped believing somewhere around year 4. Diane picked up her bag. "I just thought you should know what she was carrying before you decided how this story ends." She left. Marcus sat there for a long time with an untouched coffee going cold in front of him. He didn't go back to the office. He went home, the apartment he'd been renting since he moved out, still mostly boxes, still feeling like somewhere temporary. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop without knowing what he was looking for. He found it by accident. An old voicemail. Transferred through 2 phones over the years, sitting in a folder he'd never thought to delete. The date on it was 10 years ago. Lily's first birthday. He pressed play. Claire's voice was younger. Quieter than he remembered it being. "Hey. It's me. I know you're in the middle of the Hargrove meeting and I know the timing is terrible, but it's her birthday, Marcus. She's 1 year old today. She's been waiting by the door since this morning. I don't know what she thinks she's waiting for, she's 1, but she keeps looking at the door." A pause. "Just, if there's any way. I won't ask again." The message ended. He had no memory of receiving it. He had no memory of listening to it. He'd probably seen the notification and let it pass and told himself he'd call back later, and later became the next day, and the next day became a week, and a week became the story of the whole marriage laid flat. He closed the laptop. He sat in the dark for a while and thought about a 1-year-old sitting by a front door. Across the city, Claire was standing at the kitchen sink. She was holding a letter, folded, old, the crease line soft from being folded and unfolded too many times. She didn't read it again. She already knew every word. She held it over the sink, lit the corner with a lighter, and watched it go. She washed the ash down with cold water. She stood there until the sink was clean, and then she dried her hands, and she didn't cry. Marcus picked Lily up from the babysitters at 6. He was 3 minutes late, and he hated himself for it even though 3 minutes meant nothing. He was counting now. Every small failure suddenly had a number attached to it. The babysitter, a college student named Amy who'd been watching Lily for 2 years, met him at the door with a look he couldn't quite read. He found out why on the way to the car. "Daddy," Lily said, her hand in his, backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "I asked Amy something today." "What did you ask?" She thought about how to say it. He could see her working it out. "If you leave, does that mean you don't like me either?" Marcus stopped walking. Lily looked up at him, completely serious, waiting for the actual answer. He crouched down so he was level with her. He told her that nothing about this had anything to do with her. That he loved her. That some things between grown-ups were complicated, but that part was simple and it would never change. She nodded like she was filing the information away. "Okay," she said. "And then, can we get pasta?" He said yes. They got pasta. He watched her twirl noodles around her fork and talk about something that happened at school, and he smiled at the right moments, and the whole time the back of his mind was running the voicemail on a loop. "She's been waiting by the door since this morning." Later, after Lily was asleep, Marcus sat on the edge of her bed in the quiet and thought about the drawing. The figure at the window. The watch on its wrist. He kept turning it over, looking for an explanation that made sense. "She has an active imagination." Claire's voice. Claire's hand pressed flat against the folded paper. He reached down to move Lily's backpack off the floor. It had fallen over and her books were half spilling out. He set them back in. And then he saw the corner of another piece of paper tucked into the front pocket. Folded. Crayon-colored edges. He pulled it out slowly. Same house. Same tree. Same blue shutters. Same fourth figure standing at the window, watching the yard. Same watch on the same wrist. But this one had something the first drawing didn't. Underneath the figure, in Lily's careful, uneven handwriting, the letters she'd been practicing all year, was a name. Marcus read it once. Then again. It was not his name. Whatever you're thinking right now, sit with it. Drop your theory in the comments, because this story is only getting deeper. If you want to know whose name Lily wrote, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on so you don't miss chapter 3. Marcus didn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table until 2 in the morning with the drawing in front of him and the name staring back at him in Lily's careful, crooked handwriting. 7 letters. A name he didn't recognize. A name that had no place in his life, his marriage, or his daughter's imagination. He typed it into a search bar before he talked himself out of it. The results came back fast. An obituary. A LinkedIn profile that hadn't been updated in years. A Facebook page someone had turned into a memorial. The man had died 7 years ago. He was 31. The cause listed was a car accident, late November, 2 lanes outside the city. 1 year before Lily was born. Marcus sat with that for a moment. He scrolled through the memorial page slowly, photos of a man he'd never seen, comments from people he'd never heard of, a pinned post from a woman who called him the love of my life and signed it with initials. The initials were CM. Claire's maiden name started with M. Marcus closed the laptop. He opened it again. He stared at the photo at the top of the memorial page, a man at a rooftop party, laughing at something off camera, completely alive, and felt the specific, disorienting feeling of discovering that the person you married had an entire world before you that they never once mentioned. Not once. In 12 years. Not a word. He drove to Claire's the next morning. She answered the door before he knocked. She'd seen his car from the window, he realized. She'd had time to decide how she wanted to look when she opened it. She looked tired. She looked like she hadn't slept either. He showed her the drawing. He said the name out loud. Something moved across Claire's face, not guilt, not panic. Something older than both of those. Like hearing a word in a language she'd spent years forgetting how to speak. That's not what you think it is, she said. Then tell me what it is. She didn't. She stepped back from the door, not quite inviting him in, not quite closing it. She looked at the drawing in his hand for a long moment. He was someone I knew a long time ago, she said finally. Before us. Before everything. Claire. Marcus. Her voice was quiet but firm. Please don't do this yet. Yet. Not don't do this. Yet. Like she was asking for a delay, not a stop. Like she knew something was coming and just needed more time before it arrived. He left without an answer. He sat in his car for 10 minutes in front of her house and thought about the word yet. He called a private investigator that afternoon. A woman named Sandra that his attorney had used twice before, discreet, fast, no unnecessary commentary. He gave her the name, the obituary, the dates. I'm not looking for an affair, he said. The man is dead. I just need to understand who he was and why my daughter knows his name. Sandra said she'd have something preliminary within 48 hours. Marcus hung up and looked at his phone and almost called Claire 3 separate times and put it down each time without dialing. He didn't know what he wanted to ask her. He didn't know which answer he was afraid of. He picked Lily up from school at 3:15. She climbed into the back seat and immediately started telling him about a disagreement with her best friend over whose turn it was to be line leader, which was apparently a matter of serious consequence. Marcus listened. He asked the right questions at the right moments. They were almost home when Lily went quiet. He glanced in the rearview mirror. She was looking out the window, working something out. The man in my drawing, she said. Marcus kept his voice even. Yeah? He visits sometimes. Marcus's hands tightened on the wheel. He waited. Where does he visit, Bug? She answered immediately, like it was obvious. In Mama's phone. She has pictures of him. She looks at them sometimes when she thinks I'm asleep. She said it the way children say things that adults understand differently than they're meant. No weight behind it. No awareness of what she was handing him. She turned back to the window and resumed watching the street go by. Marcus drove the rest of the way home in silence. Sandra called the next evening. 44 hours, faster than she'd promised. The man in the obituary, she said. He never had children. No record of one, no paternity action, nothing. But he had family. What kind of family? A brother. 2 years younger. A pause. The brother is alive. And he's not far, he relocated to your city about 8 months ago. 8 months ago. For months before Marcus and Claire announced they were separating. Do you have a name? Marcus asked. I'll send it over now. The message came through 30 seconds later. Marcus opened it. He read the name. He went still. He knew that name. He'd seen it on a contract, on a business card, across a lunch table. He scrolled to his contacts and searched it, and there it was, right there in his phone, under the letter O, with a work number and a direct line. A man he'd shaken hands with. A man he'd had lunch with. A man who had asked specific questions about Lily, her age, her school, and smiled like the answers were pleasant conversation. A man who was the dead fiancé's brother. Marcus stared at the contact entry. The name looked completely ordinary. It had always looked completely ordinary. He'd never had a reason to think about it twice. He was thinking about it now. That name. That contact. Whatever you're feeling right now, trust it. Leave your theory in the comments, because this story is just getting started. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what Marcus finds when he looks a little closer. Marcus had built his entire career on reading rooms. He knew when a deal was already dead before anyone admitted it. He knew when someone was lying by the way they held their coffee cup. 12 years of boardrooms and negotiations had made him very good at watching people without letting them know they were being watched. He'd never used that skill on someone he considered a colleague. He was about to. He texted Owen that morning. Kept it casual, a project update, a quick lunch, nothing urgent. Owen responded within 4 minutes. Sure, that Italian place on 5th? Marcus said yes. He put his phone down and sat with the specific feeling of inviting someone to a table when you don't yet know if they're the reason your life is falling apart. Owen was already there when Marcus arrived. That was the first thing he noticed. Owen had gotten there first, which meant Owen had wanted to be there first. Marcus filed that away and sat down and smiled like none of it mattered. They ordered. They talked about the project. Marcus kept his voice easy, his posture open. He asked questions he already knew the answers to, just to watch Owen answer them. Owen was relaxed. Almost too relaxed. The kind of relaxed that takes practice. It happened about 20 minutes in, between the bread and the main course. Owen mentioned Claire. He didn't lead with it. He folded it into a sentence about a charity event, something about a mutual acquaintance, and then said, I actually knew Claire years ago, before you two were together. Small world. He said it the way you mention the weather. Light. Disposable. Marcus lifted his water glass and took a slow sip. Small world, he said. Owen nodded and moved on to something else. Marcus let him. He sat with the words years ago and knew and before you two were together and arranged them carefully in the back of his mind, because he had not told Owen he was separating from Claire, and Owen had not asked. He just offered the information. Unprompted. Like he'd been waiting for a gap to put it in. I knew Claire years ago. Like he was establishing something. Like he wanted the sentence on record. Then Owen asked about Lily. Not a general how's your daughter, specific. Her age, what grade she was in, which school. Marcus answered with short sentences and redirected to the project, but his hands, which were perfectly still on the table, were doing the work of staying perfectly still. A man who barely knew his family asking precise questions about his 7-year-old daughter. Marcus smiled. He changed the subject. He made it look effortless. Under the table, his knee was locked rigid. His phone buzzed. A notification from Sandra's secure number, she'd sent a file. Marcus left it unopened on the table and kept talking. He didn't look at it. He discussed the project timeline, approved a budget figure, laughed at something Owen said that was mildly funny. When Owen excused himself to use the restroom, Marcus opened the file. It took him about 4 seconds to find the photograph. It was from a party, a rooftop, city lights in the background, people in formal clothes holding drinks. The image was dated. He read the date twice because the first time didn't fully land. 11 months before Lily was born. And there in the center of it, laughing at something off camera, were Claire and Owen. Standing close. Her hand on his arm. Not the posture of two people who barely knew each other. Not the posture of a casual acquaintance. Marcus stared at the photo. He thought about Lily's drawing. The figure at the window. The name written underneath in crayon. The specific questions Owen had just asked about a 7-year-old girl's school and grade level. He thought about 11 months. He thought about Lily, who was 7. He didn't let himself finish the thought. Not yet. Not here. He closed the file and set his phone face down on the table and picked up his water glass and drank from it slowly, because the only thing he could control right now was how he looked from the outside. From the outside, he looked fine. Owen came back from the restroom and they finished the meal. They talked about nothing important. Marcus nodded at the right moments and asked the right questions, and somewhere around the final 5 minutes of the lunch he understood that he had become a very good actor in the last 48 hours. They stood to leave. Marcus shook Owen's hand, firm, normal, professional. Owen clapped him on the shoulder and said they'd talk later in the week. Marcus walked toward the exit. At the door, he stopped. He turned back, almost without meaning to. Owen was still at the table, standing, watching him. Not reaching for his coat. Not looking at his phone. Just watching Marcus with an expression that was almost friendly, almost nothing, almost unreadable. He raised one hand in a slow, easy wave. Then he turned and walked the other direction. Marcus stood in the doorway for a moment longer than he should have. Then he pushed through the door into the cold air and stood on the sidewalk and let himself breathe. His phone rang. Sandra. He answered. The photograph, she said. I know what you're thinking. But the photograph isn't the problem. What's the problem? A pause. The kind of pause that means the next sentence is going to cost him something. What she signed 8 years ago, Sandra said. There's a document, Marcus. You need to see it before you do anything else. Because right now you think you know what you're looking at, and you don't. The city moved around him, cabs, pedestrians, a delivery truck blocking the corner. All of it completely normal. All of it completely irrelevant. He stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant and thought about Owen's wave. Slow. Easy. Like a man who had nothing to worry about. Or like a man who had already won. Whatever theory you've built in your head right now, hold on to it, because this story is about to test it. Leave your thoughts in the comments, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you're there when the document Marcus is about to read changes everything he thought he understood. The document was 4 pages long. Marcus read it twice at his kitchen table at 6 in the morning, coffee going cold beside him, the rest of the apartment completely quiet. He read it slowly the first time, looking for the part where it became something else, something less than what it appeared to be. He read it the second time because he needed to be sure he hadn't misread the first time. He hadn't. It was a private paternity agreement. Signed 8 years ago, 1 year after Lily was born. Claire's name on one line. Owen's name on another. A non-disclosure clause that ran 3 paragraphs. A financial settlement attached as an addendum, the amount redacted in Sandra's copy but the structure clear, regular payments, a specific schedule, terms for termination. The kind of document you sign when you need someone to stay quiet. The kind of document you sign when the truth would cost you everything. Marcus set it on the table. He looked at it for a long time without touching it. He thought about the photograph, Claire and Owen at that rooftop party, 11 months before Lily. He thought about Owen's questions over lunch, specific and careful. Her age. Her school. He thought about Lily's drawing, the figure at the window, the name written underneath in crayon. He thought about 7 years of believing he knew exactly who his daughter was. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. He went quiet in a way that emptied the room. He got up, washed his coffee mug, put it away, and went to get dressed. His hands moved normally. His face was still. The cold that had settled in his chest wasn't anger yet. It was something that comes before anger, the moment right before everything becomes real. He called his attorney at 8:30. He said he needed to talk about custody. His attorney, a careful man named Bertrand who chose his words like they cost money, said they could revisit the custody arrangement, but wanted to understand the basis for the change. Marcus said, I have reason to believe Lily's paternity may not be what was represented to me. A pause on the line. Then, I'll clear my afternoon. Marcus sat across from Bertrand 2 hours later and put the document on the desk. Bertrand read it without expression, which was its own kind of expression. Full custody, Marcus said. I want it restructured. I want to know what that requires. It requires evidence, Bertrand said carefully. And a conversation with Claire. I'm aware. Marcus. Bertrand set the document down. Before we move on any of this, have you spoken to her? Not yet. You should. Marcus took the document back and folded it into his jacket pocket. I know. Claire called 3 times that afternoon. He watched his phone screen light up and go dark. He wasn't ready to speak. He wasn't sure what version of himself would answer if he did, the one who wanted the truth or the one who was already certain he had it. She came to his office at 4. He let her wait in the lobby for 40 minutes. He watched the clock. He wasn't doing it to punish her, or maybe he was, a little, but mostly he was using the time to decide what he was going to say and how he was going to say it without the whole conversation falling apart before he got his answer. His assistant showed her in. Claire sat across from him and looked at his face, and whatever she saw there made her go very still. Marcus asked her directly. No preamble. No build-up. Is Lily mine? The silence lasted exactly long enough to cost him something. Then Claire said, yes. One word. No elaboration. No explanation. No reaching across the desk. Just yes, delivered quietly and without flinching, like she'd been holding it ready for a long time. Marcus opened his desk drawer and set the document in front of her. She looked at it. She didn't react the way he expected, no surprise, no panic. She looked at it the way you look at something you always knew was going to show up eventually. Yes, she said again. I signed that. I know you signed it. Then you need to understand why. Claire. He kept his voice level. A paternity agreement. With Owen. Signed a year after Lily was born. Walk me through why. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She looked at him with something in her eyes that he couldn't name, not guilt, not desperation, but something that looked almost like grief. Like she was watching something she couldn't stop. I can't explain it the way it needs to be explained right now, she said. That's not an answer. I know. She stood up. She picked up her bag. But yes is the only answer I can give you right now that matters. Lily is yours, Marcus. That is the only true thing in any of this. She left. Marcus sat at his desk for a long time after the door closed. The document was still on the desk in front of him. He looked at it. The audience believed her. Then they looked at the document. Then they didn't. Neither did Marcus. His phone rang at 9:15 that night. An unknown number, then he recognized it. The landline at Claire's house. Lily had found a way to call. Daddy. Her voice was small. Careful. Mama's been crying for a really long time. Marcus closed his eyes. I know, Bug. She keeps saying something. A pause. He could hear Lily working out whether to tell him. She keeps saying she did it to protect you. Another pause. What did she protect you from? He had no answer. He sat on the edge of his bed in the dark and held the phone and had no answer at all. Is she okay? He asked finally. I think so, Lily said. She stopped crying. She's just sitting now. Okay. Can you go be with her? Yeah. A small sound, the shuffle of sock feet on a hardwood floor. Daddy? Are you sad too? He almost said no. He said, a little. Okay, she said. And then the line went quiet, which meant she'd gone to sit with her mother, which was the right thing to do, which he was glad she did. He set the phone down. She did it to protect you. He pulled up the company's financial records at 10 o'clock. Not because he expected to find anything. Because he needed to do something with his hands and his mind, and this felt like it had an edge, something he could actually follow. He searched Owen's name against company accounts for the 2 years surrounding Lily's birth. He found the transfer on the second pass. He almost missed it, routed through a subsidiary, labeled under a vendor code that didn't match anything active. The date was 8 years ago. The amount matched the structure in the paternity agreement's addendum. It had come from his company. Marcus stared at the transaction record. He went back through the authorization chain. His name wasn't on it. His signature wasn't on it. There was no approval trail connected to him in any way. Someone had used his company's accounts to make the payment to Owen. Someone who had access. Someone who had authority. Someone who had done it quietly enough that it sat buried in a subsidiary ledger for 8 years without anyone noticing. Marcus had not done this. Which meant someone else had. And that someone had been inside his company, inside his finances, inside his life, making decisions he didn't know existed, for longer than he wanted to calculate. He sat with the screen glowing in the dark and felt the shape of something much larger than a paternity agreement begin to form around him. She did it to protect you. From what? You thought you had the answer. Now ask yourself, who had access to Marcus's company accounts 8 years ago? Leave your theory in the comments. Subscribe if this story has its hooks in you, and turn on notifications, because Chapter 6 is where everything you think you know starts to crack. Marcus didn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table until 3 in the morning with the transaction record glowing on his laptop screen, tracing the authorization chain backward through subsidiary accounts, dead vendor codes, and 8 years of careful silence. The deeper he went, the colder it got. The transfer hadn't come from his division. It hadn't come from any department he managed. It traced back to an internal account that had only one controlling authority, the acting chairman's office. And there was only one period in the company's history when that office had been occupied by someone other than Marcus. He scrolled to the date. Then he sat back in his chair. His father had been acting chairman until Marcus turned 34. The transfer was dated to a year before that. A year when Marcus was a junior partner with no oversight, no access to subsidiary accounts, and no reason to look for anything that wasn't in front of him. He picked up his phone and stared at his father's contact entry for a long time. Then he got in the car. Richard Hale lived 40 minutes outside the city in the house he'd owned for 30 years, a stone colonial with a long driveway and a garden his wife had kept until she couldn't, and that now was kept by someone Richard paid to keep it. Marcus had grown up in that house. He knew every room. He knew which lights would still be on at 4 in the morning. His father's study was lit when he turned up the drive. Richard answered the door before Marcus knocked. He was dressed, not pajamas, not a robe. Slacks. A sweater. Like he'd been sitting up waiting, or like he'd never gone to bed. "Marcus," he said. That was all. No surprise in his voice. No question. Just the name, delivered in the same tone Richard used when a meeting was starting, neutral, prepared, ready. He turned and walked back toward the study. Marcus followed. The room smelled like old wood and paper, the same way it always had. Richard crossed to the sideboard without asking and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He set one on the desk in front of the empty chair and took his own glass to the seat behind it. He didn't sit down. He stood. He looked at his son. He didn't ask why Marcus was there. "The transfer," Marcus said. 8 years ago. The account tied to your office. The payment to Owen Carr." Richard looked at his glass. He didn't drink from it. He set it carefully on the corner of the desk like he was buying himself 3 extra seconds. "I did what was necessary," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the only answer that's accurate." Marcus stayed standing. "What did Owen have? What were you paying for?" Richard finally looked up. His eyes were sharp, they had always been sharp, even now at 72, even in the middle of the night. Whatever age had taken from his body, it hadn't touched that. "Not what he had," Richard said. "What he knew." The room went quiet. A clock ticked somewhere. Marcus waited. "Owen Carr knew something about Claire," Richard said. "Something from before your marriage. A legal matter. A sealed record." He paused. "I found it before you proposed. I buried it. And then I needed to make sure Owen stayed buried with it." Marcus felt the shape of what he was hearing but couldn't yet see all of it. Owen's brother was Claire's fiancé. The man who died. Yes. And Owen knew about this legal matter because his brother told him. Because his brother knew Claire. That's correct. "So you paid Owen to keep quiet." Richard picked up his glass and finally drank. "I paid Owen to stay away from the family name." "Yes." Marcus moved to the chair and sat down. He needed to sit down. "The paternity agreement. Claire signed it, but that wasn't about paternity." "No." Richard's voice was steady. Completely steady, the way a man's voice gets when he has lived with a truth for so long it no longer frightens him. "Owen didn't father Lily. You know that. Claire knows that. The agreement wasn't about a child. It was about silence. Claire signed it to protect something of her own, a sealed court record from when she was 23. Something she needed to stay sealed." He paused. "She never knew I was involved. She negotiated with Owen herself, for her own reasons. I made the payment separately. She didn't know the money came from your company." The clock kept ticking. "She was protecting something from her past," Marcus said slowly. "You were protecting the family name. 2 separate operations. Neither of you knew about the other." "Correct. And Owen was collecting from both sides." Richard said nothing. Which was its own kind of confirmation. Marcus looked at his father, really looked at him, the way you look at something when you're trying to find the version of it you recognize. The 72-year-old man across the desk had built everything Marcus now ran. Had sat at every table that mattered during Marcus's childhood, every graduation, every dinner. Had handed him the company keys 12 years ago and said, "I built this for you." Had apparently been managing his son's marriage like a subsidiary account. "What did Claire do?" Marcus asked. "The sealed record." "What was it?" Richard looked at him for a long moment. "Nothing wrong," he said. "That's exactly the problem." He opened the bottom drawer of his desk. He removed a sealed manila envelope, thick, old, the seal intact. He held it without offering it. Like he was weighing it one last time before letting it go. "She was a witness," Richard said. "To a trial you've never heard of. 12 years ago." He set the envelope on the desk and slid it toward Marcus. "Open it and you'll understand why I've been managing this for 12 years. Marcus looked at the envelope. His name was not on it. Nothing was on it. Just brown paper and a red seal that had never been broken. He looked at his father. Richard's face was composed. But underneath the composure was something else, something Marcus had never seen there before. Not guilt. Not quite. Something older than guilt. The thing a man carries when he has told himself for years that what he did was necessary, and has only recently begun to wonder if necessary and right were ever the same thing. Marcus picked up the envelope. His father poured himself another 2 fingers of whiskey and did not offer Marcus a refill. The clock on the wall kept ticking, steady and indifferent, like it had no idea what was inside the envelope Marcus was holding, or like it had always known, and had simply been waiting for him to catch up. If you felt the ground shift just now, so did Marcus. Drop your thoughts in the comments. This story is about to go somewhere you didn't see coming. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're there when he opens that envelope. Marcus read the file in his car, parked in his father's driveway, engine off, the porch light casting a long rectangle across the hood. He didn't go home first. He didn't call anyone. He just broke the seal and read. It took him 40 minutes. When he finished, he sat in the dark for a long time and thought about a 23-year-old woman sitting across from a team of lawyers who already knew exactly how to destroy her if she didn't cooperate. He thought about the 12 years since then. He thought about the first night he met Claire, a gallery opening, introduced by a mutual acquaintance he'd known for years. He'd always remembered it as accident. Good timing. Good luck. He pulled out his phone and searched the mutual acquaintance's name against his father's company records. The result came back in under a minute. Consulting contract. 12 years old. Paid in full 3 months before that gallery opening. Marcus set the phone face down on his thigh and looked out the windshield at nothing. The file was from a federal financial crimes case. 12 years old, sealed at the conclusion of proceedings. A junior account manager at one of Richard's subsidiaries had been prosecuted, convicted, sentenced, done. The case was considered closed. Except the junior account manager hadn't designed the scheme. He'd executed it. The men who designed it had prepared better, hired better, and stayed further from the paperwork. They walked away clean. Claire had been 23, working as a contract auditor for the same subsidiary. She was 3 weeks into the job when she saw the transaction structure. She was smart enough to understand what she was looking at. She was young enough to believe that understanding something meant you were supposed to do something about it. She'd written it down. Dates, figures, account numbers. She kept a record. And then Richard's legal team found out she had it. They didn't threaten her directly. That was the part that made Marcus's jaw tighten as he read it. There was no phone call, no envelope slid under a door. It was nothing that obvious. Claire's mother had been admitted to a private care facility 6 months earlier. Early onset neurological decline, she needed around-the-clock support, specialized staff, the kind of care that costs more per month than most people earn in a year. The facility was excellent. Claire had been desperate to get her in. The facility was owned by a holding company. The holding company was Richard's. No one said a word to Claire about it. No one had to. She was 23 years old, her mother was finally stable and safe, and the people who controlled that stability made sure she knew, quietly, structurally, without ever saying it out loud, that they knew who she was and where her mother lived. She burned her notes. She said nothing. She let a 26-year-old man go to prison for something he only partially did. And she had been living inside that silence ever since. He drove to her apartment. It was past 10 when he knocked. She answered in the clothes she'd been wearing all day, which meant she hadn't slept either. She looked at his face. Then she looked at the file in his hand. She stepped back and let him in without a word. He set the file on the kitchen table between them. He didn't explain it. He didn't accuse her. He just set it down and looked at her. Claire looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at him. "How long have you had this?" "Since tonight," he said. "Your father gave it to me." Something crossed her face, not relief, not quite. The particular exhaustion of someone who has been waiting for a specific thing to happen and has finally stopped waiting. She sat down. He sat across from her. "My mother's facility," she said. It wasn't a question. She already knew he'd read it, already knew he understood the mechanism. "I never signed anything. Nobody threatened me. I knew. I understood what it meant." "How old was your mother?" 58. Her voice was even. She didn't know any of it was happening. She couldn't. A pause. "I couldn't move her. I looked. There was nowhere else that could handle her level of care on what I was making. And even if I'd found somewhere, the transfer alone could have destabilized her." She folded her hands on the table. "So I stayed quiet. And then you met me." She looked at him steadily. "And then I met you. And I actually thought, that it was separate. That my life with you was mine." She stopped. "I was 24 when we got married. I thought I'd found a way out of all of it." Marcus sat with that. The woman sitting across from him had walked into his life already trapped, already silenced, already managed by his father's legal team, and had built a marriage, raised a daughter, maintained a household and a silence simultaneously for 12 years. He had no language for what that cost. "Claire." A knock at the bedroom door. Small knuckles. 3 soft taps. They both looked up. The door opened an inch. Lily's face appeared in the gap, hair messy, sock feet, one eye still half asleep. I heard talking, she said. We're just talking, baby, Claire said. Go back to bed. Lily looked at her mother. Then she looked at Marcus. She was doing the thing she always did, reading the room with that quiet, careful attention that 7-year-olds aren't supposed to have and Lily had always had too much of. Is Grandpa the one who made Mama sad? The kitchen went completely silent. Marcus couldn't speak. Claire's expression didn't break but something behind it did, something small and structural, like a wall that had been holding for a very long time finally deciding it was finished. Why do you ask that, Bug? Marcus said carefully. Lily considered this. Because Mama only cries when she thinks about Grandpa's house. And she doesn't know I notice. She paused. I notice. Claire looked at the table. She pressed her lips together. She nodded once, just barely, more to herself than to either of them. Go back to sleep, Marcus said gently. I'll come check on you in a minute. Lily looked at him for a moment longer. Then she pulled the door almost closed, leaving a sliver of light from the hallway. They listened to the soft sound of her feet on the carpet, getting quieter, then gone. Marcus looked back at the file. He turned to the last section, witness documentation, support records, names redacted except where the original filing preserved them. There were 2 witnesses listed who had declined to testify. Claire was one. He read the second name. He read it again. He knew that name. He'd seen it in the obituary, in the memorial page, in the photograph from the rooftop party. He'd seen it in the investigator's report, connected to Owen, connected to the brother who had died the year before Lily was born. The man Claire had been engaged to. He was the second witness. He had also stayed silent. He had also seen what Claire had seen. He had also made the calculation, or had the calculation made for him, and said nothing. And then, one November, on a 2-lane road outside the city, he had died in what was ruled an accident. Marcus flipped to the last page. Sandra had annotated the investigator's copy before sending it over. Her handwriting was small and precise in the margins. Next to the ruling, accidental death, case closed, she had written 4 words in pencil. Inconclusive. File was closed fast. Marcus set the file down on the table. He looked at Claire. She was looking at him. And he could see, in the way her eyes had gone very still, that she had always wondered. That she had spent 7 years wondering. That she had signed the agreement with Owen and said nothing and kept that particular question locked in a room she never opened because opening it meant admitting what it might contain. He didn't ask her. Not tonight. He just looked at the 4 words in Sandra's handwriting and felt something cold and heavy settle into the center of his chest. Inconclusive. File was closed fast. If you're feeling what Marcus is feeling right now, that anger, that grief, that sense that something enormous has been hiding in plain sight, you're not alone. Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this story has found its way into you, subscribe and turn on notifications. You need to be here for what comes next. Marcus drove back to his father's house that same night. He didn't call ahead. He didn't plan what he was going to say. He just drove, one hand on the wheel, Sandra's 4 words sitting in the back of his mind like something he couldn't put down. Inconclusive. File was closed fast. The porch light was still on. Richard answered before Marcus knocked. Again. This time, Marcus didn't read anything into it. His father was 72 years old and apparently hadn't slept properly in 12 years. Maybe he never would again. Marcus set the file on the desk between them. He turned to the co-witness page. He pointed to the name. He didn't say anything. He just watched his father's face. Richard looked at the name for a long time. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise, not panic. Something older than both of those. The face of a man who has been carrying a specific weight for so long that having it named out loud is almost a relief. He didn't deny it, Richard said finally. The co-witness. Claire's fiancé. He was going to change his statement. Marcus waited. My legal team became aware of it. A pause. 3 days before the accident. Your legal team became aware of it, Marcus repeated slowly. I did not instruct them to act. Richard's voice stayed even. I want that to be clear. But you knew. Richard said nothing. Which was the answer? You knew, Marcus said again, and you didn't stop it. And then a 31-year-old man died on a 2-lane road, and the file closed fast, and Claire spent the next 7 years wondering every single day whether the man she was going to marry was killed or just unlucky. Richard picked up his whiskey glass. He put it down without drinking. You want me to tell you I'm a monster, Richard said quietly. That would be easier for both of us. But it's more complicated than that. It's always been more complicated than that. Then uncomplicated. Marcus's voice was flat. What were you actually protecting? Richard looked at him. You, he said. The silence lasted long enough that Marcus heard the clock in the hallway tick 4 times. "That's not an answer," Marcus said. "It is the only answer." Richard opened the bottom desk drawer and removed a second folder, thinner, older, edges soft. He set it on the desk. The original financial crime. The subsidiary account. The scheme Claire witnessed. He paused. There was a second file. An internal one. It documented every account connected to the scheme. Marcus didn't move. "Your name was on one of them," Richard said. "A subsidiary account. You were 17. I asked you to sign a document. I told you it was a tax structure, a trust instrument. You asked me one question and I gave you one answer and you trusted me and you signed it." He closed the folder. "You had no idea what it was. No idea what it connected to. But your signature was there." Marcus sat down. He sat down because his legs decided they were finished standing. "If that file had surfaced in federal proceedings," Richard continued, "your name surfaces with it. 17 years old means nothing in financial crimes. The account was active for 4 years after you signed it. You would have been investigated. Possibly charged. Definitely destroyed." He looked at his son. "I spent 12 years making sure that file stayed buried. Claire was the witness who could have opened it. Owen was the man who could have talked. The money was the thing that kept both of them quiet." "And Claire's fiancé," Marcus said. His voice came out very even. He didn't know how. He was going to open it. Richard said nothing. "You built my entire life on a grave," Marcus said. "I built your entire life on a signature you made at 17 that I should never have put in front of you." Richard's voice cracked, just barely, just once. "That is the difference. That is the distinction I have lived inside for 12 years. Marcus looked at his father, at the old man across the desk who had engineered an introduction, managed a marriage, paid for silence, and looked the other way when a 31-year-old man stopped being a problem. Who had done all of it with steady hands and sharp eyes and the absolute conviction that love excuses architecture. The method was monstrous. The motive was love. Both of those things were completely true. Marcus sat with both of them and found that they didn't cancel each other out. They just sat there, side by side, equally real, equally unbearable. The front door opened without a knock. Claire walked in. She'd driven herself. She must have called Marcus and gotten no answer and figured out where he'd gone. She stopped in the study doorway, looked at Richard, looked at Marcus, and made the calculation in about 2 seconds. She came in. She sat in the chair beside Marcus, not touching him, not looking at him. She looked at Richard. Richard stood up. That alone was something. Marcus couldn't remember the last time his father stood up for anyone entering a room. "Claire," Richard said. He didn't have a speech ready. Marcus could see that. For possibly the first time in his adult life, Richard Hale had walked into a moment without a prepared position. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For the way you were approached. For what was used against you. For the years you spent inside something I built around you without your knowledge or consent." He paused. "I don't offer explanations. You've read the file. You understand the reasoning. I'm not asking you to." Claire listened. She sat perfectly still and she listened to every word. Then she said, "An apology doesn't return 7 years of silence." She stood up. She picked up her bag. She walked out. Marcus found her in the driveway. She was standing at the car, passenger door open, and Lily was inside, asleep in the back seat, head against the window, completely unaware. Claire was buckling the seatbelt around Lily carefully, the way you move around a sleeping child, trying not to wake her. The gentleness of it, the automatic, practiced tenderness, hit Marcus somewhere he didn't expect. Lily's eyes opened halfway. She looked at her mother. Then she looked past her at the house. "Did Grandpa say sorry?" she asked. Her voice was slow with sleep. Claire smoothed the hair back from Lily's forehead. "Yes, baby. He said sorry." Lily thought about this. She blinked once, twice, working it through with the serious attention she gave everything important. "Is that enough?" Claire's hand went still on Lily's hair. She didn't answer. She closed the car door softly, and she straightened up, and she stood in the driveway in the dark with her back to Marcus, and she didn't answer. Marcus went back inside. He didn't know why. He wasn't ready to go home and he wasn't ready to follow Claire and he needed somewhere to put himself for a few minutes while he figured out what kind of person he was going to be on the other side of this night. He sat at his father's desk. Richard had gone to get water or to be alone, Marcus didn't know which. The desk was quiet. The laptop was open, lit up, screen dimmed to low. Marcus moved the mouse without thinking. The screen lit up. His father's email was open. Not the inbox, the drafts folder. One draft, sitting there. Old. The timestamp read 3 years ago, a Tuesday in September. The recipient field held the name of a federal attorney. Marcus recognized the office. He read the subject line. Then he read the body, 3 paragraphs, careful and complete, the kind of thing a man writes when he has finally decided to stop running. A full voluntary disclosure. Names, accounts, dates, his own role laid out without mitigation. At the bottom, where the draft ended without being sent, his father had written one final line. Not part of the disclosure. A note to himself, maybe. The reason the send button never got pressed. Marcus's wedding anniversary. I can't take this from him yet. Marcus stared at the screen. 3 years ago. His 8th anniversary. He and Claire had gone to dinner, the Italian place near the water, Lily at the babysitter's, the two of them across a candlelit table doing their best impression of a marriage that still worked. And his father had sat at this desk with a confession addressed to a federal attorney and decided that tonight was not the night. Because of him. Marcus read the line again. I can't take this from him yet. Yet. Whatever you're feeling right now, that's the right feeling. Leave it in the comments, because this story deserves to be felt out loud. If you've made it this far, subscribe and turn on notifications, because Chapter 9 is where Marcus finally has to decide who he's going to be. Marcus spent the morning after his father's house doing something he hadn't done in 12 years. He sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad and wrote down every major decision of his adult life. Not the company ones, the personal ones. The ones that felt, at the time, like his own. The apartment he'd moved into at 26, 1 block from the office Richard had already leased for the company. The law firm he'd used for his first major contract, Richard's recommendation. The gallery opening where he'd met Claire, arranged by a contact who turned out to be on Richard's payroll. He wrote them all down. The list was longer than he expected. He looked at it for a long time. Then he crossed off the ones he'd verified as independent, decisions he could trace to his own instinct, his own research, his own choosing. That list was shorter than he feared. Both feelings sat in his chest at the same time, and neither one canceled the other out. He'd built something real. He'd also built it inside a frame his father constructed without telling him. Both of those things were true. He was going to have to find a way to live in the space between them. He folded the legal pad and called Claire. They met at a coffee shop neither of them had ever used during the marriage, neutral ground, chosen specifically because it held no history. No memory of a good morning or a difficult conversation or a birthday lunch that almost worked. No attorneys. No file folders. Just 2 people sitting across a small table with bad overhead lighting and 2 coffees going cold. Claire looked like someone who had also not slept and had also decided to stop pretending that was going to change soon. She looked, Marcus thought, more like herself than she had in years. Like something that had been pressing against her from the inside had finally been named and had slightly loosened its grip. When did you know? Marcus asked. About what Richard was doing. She wrapped both hands around her cup. Year 3 of the marriage. Maybe year 2.5. Little things first, a phone call Richard made that he mentioned too casually, a vendor contract that had his fingerprints on it but came through my desk. She paused. I didn't have the full picture. But I understood the shape of it. And you stayed. I stayed. She looked at him steadily. I thought about leaving. I thought about coming to you directly and putting everything on the table and letting it land where it landed. She stopped. Every year I chose the version that kept you safe. Marcus turned his cup slowly on the table. That's a sentence that could mean 2 different things. I know. Was it love? Or was it that you had nowhere safe to go? She didn't answer. The silence went on long enough that he felt it in his chest, a specific kind of weight, the kind that comes from a question finally being asked out loud after years of never quite getting there. Then she said, both. She said it quietly, without flinching. At different times. Both. He nodded. He didn't ask her to explain which years were which. He didn't think either of them could survive that level of precision right now, and he was done asking questions he wasn't ready to hear answered. I know it wasn't enough, she said. I know staying quiet and protecting you and telling myself that was the right choice, I know that wasn't fair to either of us. She picked up her cup. I'm not asking you to understand it. I just needed you to know it wasn't nothing. Marcus looked at the table. He thought about a 1-year-old sitting by a front door, waiting. He thought about a voicemail he'd never returned. He thought about 12 years of a marriage that was built on a foundation neither of them fully knew existed, and he thought about how much of it had been real anyway, underneath all of it. He couldn't answer that. He wasn't sure he'd ever be able to. But he knew what he was going to do next. He drove to his father's house one more time. Richard was in the garden when Marcus arrived, standing near the far hedge, not doing anything in particular, just standing. He turned when he heard the car. He watched Marcus walk toward him across the lawn and he didn't say anything, just waited, like a man who has finally stopped trying to get ahead of what's coming. Marcus stopped a few feet away. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I'm going to the federal attorney," Marcus said. "I'm going to waive whatever protection the old agreements built around me. I'm going to open the file and let them see everything, my name, the account, the signature, all of it. And I'm going to tell them I had no knowledge of what I signed." He paused. "Which is the truth?" Richard looked at him. "You'll lose the company. I built it once." The words came out without hesitation. Marcus heard them leave his mouth and recognized them as something he'd actually believed before he knew he believed it. Something that had been sitting in him, forming, while he'd been busy finding out who he really was. Richard looked at his son for a long time. His face did something complicated and then went still. He didn't argue. He didn't offer a counter. He just nodded, one small motion, and looked back at the garden. Marcus got in the car and drove home. He didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed with the lamp on low and the city quiet outside and the divorce papers on the nightstand where they'd been sitting for 2 weeks. 32 pages. Everything divided, everything settled, every line waiting for his signature. He looked at them. He didn't touch them. At some point after midnight, his bedroom door opened. Small footsteps. Lily appeared in the gap, hair loose, holding her blanket by one corner the way she'd done since she was 3. She didn't say anything. She crossed the room, climbed up onto his bed, and settled in next to him, pulling her blanket up to her chin. Within 2 minutes her breathing had slowed and her eyes were closed and her hand had found his in the dark and stayed there. Marcus looked at her. He looked at the divorce papers. He looked back at Lily. He sat awake for a long time, his daughter's hand in his, completely still. His phone rang at 6 in the morning. Bertrand. His attorney. Marcus answered on the second ring. "You need to come in." Bertrand's voice was careful in the specific way it got when something had happened that he hadn't anticipated. "Someone submitted a voluntary disclosure to the federal attorney's office this morning. Full filing. Before business hours." Marcus sat up. Lily stirred beside him, shifted, went still again. "It wasn't you," Bertrand said. Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. "You need to see whose name is on it. Whatever you think you know right now, stay with it. Leave it in the comments. This story has 1 chapter left, and it earns everything. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're there when it ends." The name on the disclosure was Richard Hale. Marcus sat in Bertrand's office at 7:30 in the morning and read the filing cover page twice. Full voluntary disclosure. Submitted at 5:49 a.m., before Marcus had even gotten off the phone, before he'd gotten dressed, before he'd had any chance to do the thing he'd decided to do. His father had beaten him to it. Bertrand set a copy of the filing on the desk and let Marcus read without commentary. It was thorough. It was complete. Richard had named himself as the primary architect of the suppression. He'd named the accounts, the dates, the legal team, the chain of decisions. He'd documented the subsidiary structure and the exposure it created. He'd documented everything. Marcus's name appeared twice in the filing. Both times as a minor signatory with no knowledge of underlying purpose. Both times cleared. He'd been removed from it entirely. One final move. His father's last act of management, protecting his son by stepping fully in front of everything, absorbing it all, leaving Marcus nothing to confess because there was nothing left to confess. Marcus closed the folder. He looked at the window for a long time. He had wanted to be the one who chose accountability. He had driven to Bertrand's office ready to do it himself, ready to stand in front of it and say this happened and I'm telling you first. That choice had been waiting for him. He'd been building toward it for 3 days. His father had taken it from him. Gently. Completely. One more time. The federal review opened within the week. Richard's assets were frozen pending investigation. The process, Bertrand explained, would take years, these things always did. Richard retained his own counsel, separate from anything connected to Marcus's company. Marcus was contacted within 10 days. Not as a target. As a witness. The federal attorney's office was a quiet building with fluorescent lights and chairs designed to be uncomfortable. Marcus sat across from 2 investigators and answered every question they asked. He gave them everything he had, the files, the transfers, Sandra's annotations, all of it. He held nothing back. It was the only version of accountability left available to him, and he took it. The investigators thanked him. They shook his hand. They told him he was free to go. He sat in his car in the parking garage for a while afterward and thought about what free to go felt like when you'd been hoping for something harder. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday afternoon in March. No attorneys in the room. That had been Marcus's request, and Claire had agreed without discussion, as if she'd been going to suggest the same thing. They met in a conference room at Bertrand's firm after hours, empty, borrowed, quiet. 2 pens. 2 copies. 32 pages that had been sitting on nightstands and kitchen tables and desk corners for months. Lily was not there. They had agreed on that together, carefully, on the phone the night before. She was at a friend's house, at a birthday party with balloons and cake and no awareness that anything significant was happening elsewhere. That was exactly right. That was the one thing they'd gotten exactly right. Claire signed first. Her hand was steady. Marcus watched her turn through the pages, unhurried, reading each one, not performing the process but actually doing it. He respected that. Then she slid the copies across and he signed. When it was done, they sat for a moment in the quiet. Not in grief. Not in relief. In something that didn't have a clean name, the specific stillness of two people who have survived something enormous together and are now, finally, on the other side of it. I hope it gets easier, Marcus said. Claire looked at him. It already has. She picked up her copy and put it in her bag. A little. She left. He sat for another few minutes, alone in the borrowed room, and then he turned off the light and left too. He set up the foundation 3 months later. Small, intentionally small. Not a splashy announcement, not a press release, not the kind of thing that gets named after yourself in marble letters above a door. A legal advocacy fund, operating quietly, focused on witnesses in financial crimes cases who faced coercion or institutional pressure to stay silent. He named it after Owen's brother. The man whose death was inconclusive. The man who had also seen what Claire saw and also stayed quiet and also, in the end, run out of road. It wasn't enough. Marcus knew it wasn't enough. He put it together anyway, because the alternative was doing nothing, and doing nothing had already cost more than he could calculate. Claire read about it in a press filing. She texted him 2 words, "Thank you." He didn't reply right away. He sat with those 2 words for a long time before he wrote back, "It was the least." She responded, "It was a start." Claire's sealed record was expunged 4 months after the disclosure. The legal basis was duress, that the silence had been coerced through structural threat, not freely chosen. The judge who signed the order used the word compelled. It was accurate. It was also insufficient. But it was official, and it was permanent, and it meant that the thing Richard's team had used to manage her for 12 years no longer existed anywhere that mattered. She took a position at a non-profit legal firm the following month, one that handled exactly the kind of cases her own had been. The kind where the person who saw something wrong was punished for staying quiet and would have been punished for speaking. She knew the terrain. She understood it from the inside. Marcus found out from Diane, who told him with a tone that meant she didn't ask me to tell you but I'm telling you anyway. He listened. He said he was glad. He meant it without complication, which surprised him a little. He picked Lily up from school on a Wednesday in April. She came through the doors at 3:15 with her backpack bouncing and her ponytail slightly falling out, which was how it always was by the end of the school day, and she saw him at the curb and ran. Not because anything was wrong. Just because she still ran to him, the way she always had, the way he hoped she always would. She stopped in front of him, slightly out of breath. "Are you still leaving?" she asked. He crouched down. He looked at her, her serious eyes, the question sitting in them with full sincerity, no performance, no drama. Just a 7-year-old who needed the actual answer. "From the house," he said. "Not from you. Never from you." She thought about this. He could see her working through it the way she worked through everything important, carefully, without rushing, giving it the weight it deserved. Then she took his hand and they walked to the car. The crayon drawing is framed now. It hangs on the wall of Marcus's new office, smaller than the old one, different building, a view of a courtyard instead of a skyline. He put it up himself, the first week, before he'd unpacked anything else. The unknown figure at the window. Same rectangular watch. Same careful lines. He finally asked Lily about it. He sat with her one evening and pointed to the figure and asked who it was. She looked at it for a moment. Then she said, "That's the man Grandpa was always afraid of." He asked her what she meant. She shrugged the way children shrug when they've said the thing they have to say and don't have more to add. He thought about it for a long time afterward. The federal attorney. Owen's brother. Richard himself, staring at his own reflection in a window, afraid of the version of himself that might finally surface. He never landed on an answer. After a while, he stopped needing to. This story was about a divorce. And then it wasn't. It was about what we build our lives on, and who we trust, and what love looks like when it's been carrying too much for too long. If it stayed with you, leave a comment, we'd love to know which part hit hardest. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because every story we tell is built to stay with you long after it ends.